So I just watched in one day all of the network state from October 30, Monday, October 30, Amsterdam conference. I've watched probably over 20 hours of Balaji speaking online over the last year and a half or so. And big fan, of course. I've been very interested in the sovereign nation movement. And I think, in a deeper sense, just identifying the problems of how to live better. I've been familiar with Patrick Friedman's work for a while, and my name's Ev Kirsch, and I just wanted to give you a rundown because it's I didn't see any online, and of course it's always nice to have. Um, these aren't time stamped, but this is my rundown. I'll try to make it quick. I went through before rather slowly, and I decided to redo it. So here it is from the beginning to the end. There's a lot of speakers. Sometimes I will go on tangents, so feel free to skip. And if you want, comment on the bottom and ask me questions, and I'll try to get back to you, or on Twitter perhaps. So it starts out, first speaker is Balaji. He goes on and he talks about the network state stuff. If you're familiar with it, I won't go into detail. But he's really focused on practice. There's been a lot of talk of theory. And he splits it up into this into the replacement of institutions in the physical sense, in the place sense, education, publishing of data, even of sort of online platforms and apps, in particular computer science education, and a few others, and parallel DAOs, so ways of getting people to financially cooperate. So the first the first speaker that starts is this guy Grin. He's the tech lead at a company called Cabin. So here in the beginning, the first few speakers are really in the place and physical sense of these are physical and place projects, and these are people that are presumably just startups in the network state stack. So he talks about the fact they have 4,200 community. Grin at Cabin talks about 4,200 community members. It's not entirely clear how the physical community operates from how he described it, but they have supper clubs and stamp arrangements and a whole digital system for this citizenship model with a web of trust and a club member vouching model for people to become members. And there's a dashboard, his network pulse, for getting everybody together at a central place and talk about what's coming up. And he sort of is describing his startup and how it goes in the space. Jason is the next speaker from Square Mile in SF, and that's a concept where they're trying to make sort of a community, an autonomous community, mostly based in a Square Mile of SF. He is definitely pushing physical community. He says there's 150 people. And he has an accelerator, an AI accelerator that he's been involved in. This is definitely a co-living community, and it seems to be financially organized around co-living rent. Sort of seems like a post-college business in the sense of a post-college crowd, a lot of singles, a lot of people who are a little bit young and still figuring out things. It doesn't seem like there's a critical mix amongst the people he's discussing. It seems like very much a very tech-heavy crowd, and that's the thing that in the first half of part one, pre-lunch of this network state talk, it seems that the first half of startup speakers were very like tech nomad, remote work, digital nomad, digital work heavy. And there's some contrast with that in the second half, and what's interesting about people pointing that out. So I'll get back to that. He talks about how basically these kinds of community meetups which he's produced. He's sort of like an event producer. This Jason guy always tend to scatter to the wind afterward. His approach kind of reminded me of this sort of Silicon Valley vibe. The show, if you know it, it's like a very tech bro show. But in the end, he actually starts mentioning how he used his machine learning skills to produce some sort of like friendship slash dating algorithm to get people together and sort of bring people together in a personal sense with 3 or 4 people at a time at a conference perhaps, and give them time to actually hang out together and form close relationships. And I thought that was actually really, really interesting, and something that is alluded to and some other talks, but really how AI and matching can help pair people and pair groups and create closer bonds, which is very important. It's a theme that will come up later, especially as a lot of these startup people deal with nomadism. Nomadism is not a new thing. Having it digital really isn't a new thing, and there's a really rich history of psychosocial reality for thousands of years, detailed in even biblical stories about the problems of being a nomad. So that's really important to start talking about, and throwing technology at it is, I think, a very good thing, but is not revolutionary in a sense. Perhaps it could be. There's some computational sociology and algorithms, and putting people together could really change things. Who knows? Anyway, Zach Milburn is next. He's of the startup called Nomad. He points out that nomadism is a real problem. People just feel disattached. At best, what I find amongst people that I've met is that you have a couple, and they get along very well and they travel together, so they keep each other company, and that allows for the sort of basic unit of nomadism. But when you have single people traveling, or people not well affiliated, or even sometimes people who have a significant other, or there's stress, or even a family, there could be problems. The nuclear family is as small as it gets, and if you want real community, you have to find ways of solidifying connections between people. So Zach talks about this, and he sort of has what I'm hearing is a Soho Club type of, fancy member club type of approach. I'm not hearing much else from Zach. But he talks about co-living villages. There's one in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a goal of 10,000. He wants to sort of scale the software behind this and license it out. He's got a sort of a licensing scheme, and I'm not too I'll just be critical here. I'll say I'm being critical. I'm not too bullish on the idea of licensing models, or even freemium models. If you have a good template of software for allowing other people to start up their own network states, just like give it away more or less. Like, find a way to make it useful without at least upfront costs, because this is a movement where it's really not about gatekeeping. Dryden Brown of Praxis is next. He says he's negotiating with governments. He really didn't talk about which government. He kept on sort of repeating that, and he said his goal is 10,000 people moving in 2026. Where? I don't know. Just conspicuously absent on details, and really didn't talk anything about Neom or other startup cities, which his startup city, which is his whole thing. Oh, they're having a startup city, and they're moving people there. Okay, great. It's a little too unspecific. Ryan Johnson then comes out from Cul-de-sac, which is a car-free community. I really would have liked to hear more about the car-freeness of it. I'm from New York City, born in Brooklyn and raised in Manhattan, and a lifelong cyclist, not a fundamentalist cyclist, but I do use a car, park a car. Parking's getting extremely expensive, and congestion pricing is coming up soon, and mobility is really everything, right? Everything is about motion. So to me, I'm on a tangent now, but Ryan Johnson's success in his Tempe, Arizona thing with essentially community development. I mean, this is just basic real estate development, but really thinking about transport. And this will be a theme with other people here, which is that America has problems. If you're really thinking about the future of how people are living, not just in a network state way, but in any community, population density is very, very important topic. There's places where it's just not possible in any sort of realistic sense. It's just high cost of transportation can just kill communities. Let's just say it that way. People are too far apart, too much time, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, next guy, Eric Remen of Prospera, who's from Venezuela, talks about Prospera. Prospera has a whole history to it. You can talk to people about it. There's another presenter later on in part 2 who's from Prospera, and it's a very interesting thing. He talks about the difficulties of negotiating special economic zone deals with sovereign nations, and he claims they have 1,400 residents, but have created 4,000 jobs. And what he doesn't allude to, and I think this is something I'm going to come back to again and again as my personal sort of focus, the thing I'm really interested in is the big problem is people continuously in the network state talk about community. It's like, it's a word that you have to say again and again and again, but what does this really mean? And there's many different types of communities, so it can be a very loose a term, but in a deeper sense, if people have common values, that can be a really important part of a solid community. When everyone's moving around, that kind of make it very hard. So then community has to be based on common culture. Nomadic cultures can have very tenuous community bonds. If we're talking about a tight knit common culture, you're talking about something deeper than that. That takes time to develop, root itself. And a place like Prospera, he doesn't really talk about what's the real. He didn't talk about religion at all. Where are people from? What's their ethnic or not ethnic, but ethno-religious background? Like where are their values? And it's easy to just say, well, we're humanist, right? We'll get back to that later. A discussion of that, if not in this video, maybe at some point else. Next guy is Andrew Rose of Fractal. He talks about writing his manifesto. There's 36 residents. They're in my hometown of New York City. I didn't even know about them, or I don't think I did. And he just has a really good vibe. He dresses really nice, and he's got great, great long hair. I love the guy's hair. And he talks about how important it is to host short-term stays and weekly meetups. And this is like I love how sometimes in all of these talks, I'm listening to these people speak, and I'm finding the meaning in what they're doing in sometimes just like the last sentence of what they talk about. I can be sometimes critical of a project and its scope because everybody has a vision, and it's like hard to execute. But it's the details that, to me, really make connection and connectedness between all these projects. And the connectedness is like how we live, how are we people? And so how do people start new groups and create sort of a stickiness to what they're doing so other people become part of it? And of course, yes, it's great to have capital and fun things, but the social stickiness, he talks about having short-term stays and weekly meetups. No one has really talked about couch surfing. People have Kiffy, which is like van life, but the idea of couch surfing and having a couch surfing culture, and like how do you do that without being like an annoying couch surfing company or whatever? And so that's kind of cool. Anyway, he's trying to make that happen in East Williamsburg / Bushwick, and I think that's great. New York City's an interesting and great place for this, and I wish Praxis would have been more active in New York City. The next speaker is Brooke Bowman of Vibe Camp. She basically talks about how to start a party group online for Twitter folks and make digital connections feel more personal and real through essentially happenings and events and unconferences or real conferences. It really implies the bigger question, though, and she talks about how it's a great way to make real friends and solidify friends as opposed to online dating, where people might have casual dating to make friendships, not just online casual sex or of finding a relationship, but just for friendships. And it implies a bigger thing about, and I think it might have been Zach or Jason of Square Mile and SF. I think it was Jason. It implies a bigger thing of how we begin using AI and other systems that aren't necessarily decentralized or in any meaningful way to pair people. And this is a really important thing, people matching, right? In the age of social media, where centralized disintermediation has been used against us, it's been weaponized against us. First through visual advertising, right, to steal our attention spans, but then to monetize things about us. Now, sometimes it's been good, but in the case of online dating, and the good part is, of course, if you've had some enjoyable experiences from online dating, short ones or longer ones, and many people have, still, apart from the money, a lot of online dating is there because they need you to continuously date. They don't want you to find someone for a long-term relationship, and also they want this casual hookup culture. So there's this aspect of online dating, and it's frankly directly advertised in the New York City subway, where they want this repeat sort of business. And in this sense, online dating can be just soul-sucking and really deeply problematic, right? And extend that to how people meet each other through social media and what social media is really doing to people. Is it really creating solid bonds between people or solid group connections? And I'm not so sure. Maybe out of incompetence, it's just not, or maybe sometimes it's deliberate. But I think when you go into the spirit of this, it's I got that from Brooke, that she really enjoys connecting people and wants that to happen, and it's a driver, and I respect that. I really like that, and I think that's it's very socially vital to have that glue. People who provide this glue. Alex Rivas from Cover comes up next. He's talking about new real estate systems driven by software. But what he's really focused on is the physical. This is something I really love. I've given a lot of thought to this while walking around the city and biking, the two things I love to do. And At the same time, his physical discussion is a little, I wouldn't say out of place, but it's just not typical for what you think of as a lot of software and conceptual stuff. Now, this is the really fascinating part. Again, while he's talking about modular construction and how sort of introduces the sort of like hybrid, maybe tiny house kind of approach, or just modular house approach, not tiny, to creating cheap modular systems, which is a discussion that a lot of people have outside of the network state concept. He's talking about fast city construction and fast permitting and all this, but really, in the end, he just touches upon the most important part of his talk, in my opinion, which is the bigger observation of future legal frameworks for creating new cities or new parts of cities that have fast permitting and fast zoning. And this is such a big concept that he just sort of like touches on it, which is that. And as a lawyer, this is something I've grappled with, which is why it's so big. If you want to create a new piece of a city or a place that's an X outside of a city that you hope to grow into a city, or you want to create a totally new city, you you really have to start thinking about your legal framework for it, right? And it's easy to take old legal frameworks and just piggyback on old zoning frameworks. And it's wonderful to think that you're going to have, a Dubai-like success or success of some other major SEZ city like Shenzhen, which, later on, I think his name is Mark Lutter touches on. These are exceptions. If you're going to start from the beginning, if you're starting to think with like the Omega City or the new big city or one or two of them, that's going to be the new network centers. And this is really putting the cart before the horse. But you're going to have to think of a city that can be developed organically. It's not like all of a sudden you have all this money, like you're getting your $1 billion. No, you're going to have to attract people, and it's not going to be necessarily, if you want to get it to go organically and start somewhere, you have to have a legal system that allows for great flexibility. And so Alex Rivas talks about a legal system that takes into account sound, insulation, noise, air, light, your views. This isn't just your traditional sort of legacy system, which is essentially air rights, which have been heaped upon what used to just be your building rights on top of, you can build so much space on top of your 2D footprint, which is typical legacy systems, right? Air rights are in New York City. You can build up to a certain point and sell off that you can't build any higher. That's about as good as it got. We need a new system so that you can really have modular construction and forced ways of compensating people for eminent domain in a framework for cities that have to grow, right? And there's got to be a lot of thinking about that. So a well-paired next guy starts speaking, Ryan Rizbecki of Spectra, who actually worked on bike sharing in New York City. I owned a City Bike key fob before City Bike even was live. I was so excited about it. He worked on jump bikes, not city bikes, but Jump got bought by Uber, and so he's got some very interesting experience. And again, he talks about what he's doing in Puerto Rico, and he's trying to get something started. Super cool. And the fact that he's into urban planning, and he also has a game design studio. So much of urban planning really is this 3D world. And what Ryan really kind of hints at, and his massive concept here, is not a lot of his physical stuff that he's building, which he is, but it's the virtualization of all this stuff. The massive concept is that you can build out small changes to cities and small cities and play with concepts all in a simulation, right? If you do it in a simulation and you do it many times, you can test out concepts before you put them into reality. And what he really hones in on, one of my favorite concepts that he talks about, and this is something that this is my thing. He talks about three-dimensionality in cityscapes, and why this is so important is because the cities of the present that impress us, and there's nothing wrong, I suppose, with the occasional tower, skyscraper. But this has happened on 57th Street in Manhattan, where I live, and you have these just massive towers. People just keep on building taller because you can. As if the Burj Khalifa is not tall enough, they're building a 1 kilometer tower. I think it's called the Burj Al Saud or something like that in Riyadh, which, okay, it's super cool, but when you really think of the future of density, hyperdensity, and just how people can live together, in high density or mid density situations, it's all about three-dimensionality horizontally. It's not about vertical. If you look at our cities now, even New York City, it's just it's horrible. It's not connected in a horizontal sense, and horizontal connectivity is what can make all the difference. So he talks about skyways. There's of course in New York City an amazing skyway called the Skyline, the High Line. That's great, and that's just one example. But he also talks about underways, which is like how to build tunnels for autonomous delivery, and so that you can move transportation away from being in the same path as pedestrians, because why do you need vehicles moving next to pedestrians? And so three-dimensionality is really important, and the only really good way to start to approach design in a three-dimensional sense and changes in that sense, not necessarily just new construction, but changing construction, simulation. It's so important, and we can get to that later, but it's really not really so much a network state concept quite yet, but it's a great concept, and I'm really amazed. He's in Puerto Rico, other people are in Costa Rica. There's clearly an emerging sort of geography to this network state, and we'll talk more about that later. So I was just very impressed with the overall sort of scope of experience and maybe connectivity. I really liked it from Ryan. And video gaming is something again later. Then Shervin Pishavar of Edison Alpha comes on. Here's a guy clearly with a lot of institutional experience. He's building Norman's Cay in the Bahamas. As it sounds like it's going to be a development for incredibly wealthy people. The Bahamas are a pretty wealthy place. It's got an airport. He does mention that any legit territorial state, in order to be practical, especially if it's an island, has to have its own customs and airport and rights of way that are unmolested and sort of smoothly integrated to its like local uncle jurisdiction from which it derives legitimacy and authority to do as it pleases. And that's like, he sort of puts that in there. Stefan Zinger is next from Orascom. Here's a conglomerate that just creates massive amounts of homes. He talks about huge pictures of Haram City in Cairo. Huge, impressive scale. I would love to visit and see that place, or just get a tour of it, even virtually. And then he talks, he goes on a lot, and it's really interesting, but it's also very picture-dense explanation of their developments. But then he talks about the huge opportunity in rehabilitating slums, which I find fascinating because I've always someone with my interest in sovereign cities, and also having wanted to go to Patri Friedman's like Libertad flotilla, and also having been to Burning Man on a good year, not the mud year. And seeing things organically be created in a messy way sometimes, I sometimes think of a network state as having a lot of possibilities, and new cities as having a lot of possibilities. One of them being, just look at how slums happen. What is a slum? It's just like a little small city that happened on the side of a bigger city where people just had the right, not really the right to do it, but they did it and they were tolerated. And then, of course, you get political problems. So he talks about gentrifying, that's the wrong word, but rehabilitating some urban slums. This is, sort of like good money from the developing world chasing seemingly obvious low-hanging fruit in terms of improving people's lives and making money at the same time. Now, is it scalable? I really don't think so, but I think the lessons to be learned about going into the urban slums of the world, which are the highest growth places, and helping people sort of like leapfrog a lot of problems just seems like so wildly awesome. He's in the Dakar Peninsula as well, which super interesting. Next is Yaler Moon from Metacartel. He's a guy who does Ethereum grants. He's got a lot of his previous experiences with Moloch DAO. I guess that was sort of a tongue-in-cheeky type of DAO, but now he does Meta DAO. And they talk about how they seed smaller DAOs with DAO grant money, and it's sort of like a DAO into a DAO, sort of derivative situation for experimentation, and how MetaCamp also has its own like vibe unconference retreat, and it's in Costa Rica, and they've turned that into sort of a campus concept with, sort of, it seems like a software suite, sort of like Zuzulu might have, or other of these network states might have. On Playa Negra. It sounds great. I would want to say that from a lot of these concepts that I'm seeing, there seems to be a need for, and I'm not saying it's bad, but it seems to be there's a lot of redundancy in building out these concepts. And the people who are more in the app space or on the side of like building the sort of software of it in a licensing sense or in a template sense are trying to address that. But anyway, I'll get back to that. So Zach Anderson is next out with Coordinape. He's the Web3 transparency organization. They create, I guess, incentive maps and reputation maps for getting people to work on projects. It's essentially project management software, right? Which I think is like one of these things that I was just mentioning. There's a lot of redundancy. Why can't everyone just use the same sort of citizenship platform, or in this case, project management platform? Obviously, project management is a key technology for organizing people. Normally, we look at the SaaS, right? SaaS, software as a service, VC sort of model in Silicon Valley, where people go in and they finance these SaaS. This stuff's not like over. It's still there. It's still growing, but it's hit a plateau. And this idea of extracting out and just making everyone a subscriber and seeing how many corporations will seat with subscriptions your SaaS model. We're talking here about changing the world, right? And that, in a real sense, of abandoning sort of previous extractive VC models. And yet, any good software, Web3, decentralized or otherwise, and having other sort of censorship resistant as well as centralized control resistant, muddling resistant technologies against having like a Fiverr or something like that, where there's just a lot of problems, and yet there's still gonna be problems. But having project management and other types of software platforms will be obviously extremely important, and they have to cater to the network state kind of clients. And this is really a long-term project and a real sacred project, if you ask me. So he talks about that there's deeper power for customizing incentives, or rather, he alludes at this, that we don't want these rigid incentive pyramids for economic automation. But there's a way of really changing the way we work, right? And that's really important. And work is going to be a fundamental theme of the network state people aren't really talking about yet, right? When people live together, when they have common communities and all these things, you have to think of class structure. We're talking about states. States usually have critical mass of people. There's class structure based on, at the very least, what people do. People organize into classes based on skills, sometimes even guilds, sometimes other aspects. Skill sharing, task sharing. There's the digital nomads and the people who work on essentially software, which can be done from anywhere and is also idea-based, as opposed to people who do the maintenance or work with physical things. And that will come up later. But it's very important to think about what AI can do for, and not just AI, we say that as a sort of generic word, but how we can reimagine an economy where the automation of a lot of skills, or the chunking of tasks of skills, so that they can be automated or even done by robots or done by other people by being taught to them quickly, so that we can delabor a lot of the work in the high-skilled tasks. High-skilled tradesmen, shouldn't be wasting their time on something if it's possible that a lot of what they do can be outsourced to a nearby person in your community so that they can be taught it. This allows for like massive gains in efficiencies, matching these kinds of people, finding ways of making it happen. This is part of the new economics of the future. And that's something else to be discussed, but that's not part of the network state talk that Balaji hosted. So we can talk about that later. Sandre Roche is next. She's from Safety Wing and Border Pass Plumia, or he is. He built a freelancer platform basically because he wanted the healthcare benefits. He doesn't say healthcare, but it's healthcare of Norway, right? There's other social insurance benefits, and he talks about social insurance benefits and how it's important for the sort of nomad class to have access to this. It's travel insurance. He doesn't really go into the details how different countries are really different. He doesn't talk about piggybacking, but this is all really important. And of course, healthcare is really important. We'll talk about that more with Roatan and what a health system really means, not just for having corporations that build new technologies, but just provide what people need. He also talks about nomad visas, how that's really important, and how basically he developed a green card issuance platform, which is essentially the new Schengen for a worldwide system. Sounds really ambitious. I could see how he would get a lot of money for something like that, and frankly, it sounds super fucking cool. Sorry to curse. It sounds super cool. I'm really interested in that, and having a cool green card system. I've heard of, like, let's say Uruguay recently, maybe last year, opening up like automatic green card systems. So I don't know how much these nomad visas are necessary. Sometimes you could just show up if you're from the right country and you show you have enough money in your bank account. But even so, there seems to be a lot of dovetailing. So Lindsay from Yam is next, and she has this hyper focus on digital nomadism, and she really talks a lot about the loneliness and lack of connection of people on their own being digital nomads and the new economy. A big emphasis on new economy, as if there's only one new economy leading everything. Her talk, the tone of it, I don't mean to. I try to find something good in everybody's talk. And there was a lot of good in her talk, but it reminds me a little bit of her language and her tone of the whitewashing. Whitewashing is not the word I'm looking for. I'm really not. I'm anti-woke, actually. So what's the word for the greenwashing would be for the Greens. Whitewashing would be for the supposed wokeism. This is sort of let's call it network state washing, the state washing, right? The state washing or the digital nomad washing of global living. How great it is to be a digital nomad, right? How great it is to work on a Fiverr and be a gig worker. Like, these things have a massive downside, and they're part of sort of like a neo-feudalism that's happening. And I'm not saying we can stop it. I'm not saying we shouldn't go along with it and find better ways to do it. But the glorification of it, also taking it out of context, because if you want to create new communities, you have to make amends for that and acknowledge that actually you need a lot more than just nomads and people who have digital skills to make things work. She talks about the mindfulness retreats and all these fun things they do and fly all over the world, and it sounds wonderful. And again, she takes a stab at the dating apps for making friends, and that's also, like, dating apps come back a lot and a lot. They've been mentioned frequently in this, and very interesting, because when people are traveling, they're looking for people and frequently wind up resorting to dating apps, and it feels like a waste of time. I guess. It seemed like for her it did. Patrice Friedman, the famous Patrice Friedman, is next. He goes down a little bit the road of how sovereign state movement progressed, and and he talks about his own seasteading. I think that's wonderful. I followed his seasteading a lot. I briefly owned a sailboat just because I was curious what it'd be like to sleep on it. I'd slept on my friend's houseboat a number of times, and obviously not very practical for a bunch of reasons, but it is cool, the idea of, law of the sea and having a flag on your boat. Frankly, one of the things I missed in the seasteading movement that no one ever mentioned, but I found on my own research, is that there's something super cool called biomineralization. Some very exotic people in the 70s, before modern seasteading or sovereign city movement really got thought up, some people in the 70s came up with the idea of biomineralizing, basically like creating artificial reefs using sort of like steel and other stuff they'd put in the water off of the Indian Ocean, where there's some of the largest shallow subsea areas that are very shallow plateaus. Super interesting. The Russians mapped the area with their fishing fleet. Anyway, that never came up in Patrice's time that I read about, but maybe not. He mentions Paul Romer's early 2000s talks. The famous TED Talks, I think Paul Romer, the professor, talks about SECs, special economic zones, operating essentially as companies. And Patrice Friedman describes the modern predicament we're in, is that governments can be seen as just industries, as companies, very large, inefficient companies with captured clients. He talks about it in this very transactional way, which is sort of what a lot of the tone is, and some of that's very useful. He talks about investing in Africa and Etana and some digital free zone, and in the new Palau regime. A lot of these are sort of gamesmanship investments in trying to create a transaction, forum shopping, jurisdiction shopping, ability to be where you want to be and create a company or a city where you want to create it. Trade is vital. Rights are vital. And we'll get to different, maybe some different aspects of that later when Mark speaks. But Patrice, and a lot of people very much talk in sort of the idea of the company town, as if the network state is a town or a state somewhere. Anyway, Vitalik comes on, doesn't say much. He's doing Zuzulu. Zuzulu is the next big thing. It was in Montenegro, if I remember. And I had shown up virtually for a couple of things there, but it sounds great, and it's going to be for 2 months in Prospera, I believe, starting January 1st, and I really would like to attend. So, part 2, after lunch. Okay, we got Glenn Greenwald. He comes on. And Glenn Greenwald's just amazing. I'm so glad that Balaji had him on. And Matt Taibbi, and there's so many others, Ryan Christensen maybe even, and Whitney Webb, who knows, right? But all these people are basically saying the same thing, which is media is about mind control, and the propaganda is out there, and that has to do with centralized institutions and their control over the internet, essentially. So he mentions Rumble. He doesn't talk about Odyssey, which may be shutting down, and other decentralized video. But video may be the key. Decentralized video and other publishing platforms may be the key, at least as far as he can tell, to maintaining our freedom, I guess. If you go to trendingcontent.com, a good friend of mine is working on something very similar. And it's like, how do you publish and keep things decentralized? Decentralization, and this will keep on coming up again and again. First, it was of money, but then decentralization of apps in general. This idea that you decentralize everything and suddenly it's better. Sure, creating an unhackable verification scheme for providing incentives to people to produce content and to be part of a community that provides legitimate feedback, not deliberate noise or channel stuffing feedback. These are all really important, aligning incentives, but the crowd is the crowd, and decentralizing doesn't necessarily suddenly solve all the problems that the crowd's perfect just because you decentralized incentive schemes. But anyway, for media, it's another discussion. Ashley Rinsberg comes next and says truth is important, and he says the network state is the solution to truth. And again, it's okay, but whatever the apps are, you have a crowd, so he talks about fact checking and disintermediation and how fact checking can be different because of decentralized apps versus centralized apps. Twitter now has community notes. That's very centralized, but it seems to be a counterweight to fact checking, which I would just call outright propaganda on like things like Facebook or whatever. But fact checking is super problematic. He doesn't really go into the problematic nature of it, other than to say, well, consensus through some sort of decentralized algorithm will help fix things, and maybe it will, but it's just a really important topic that requires a deeper discussion one day. Alana Newhouse comes out from Tablet. Tablet's a Jewish magazine. I happen to be ethnically Jewish and raised actually not an Orthodox family, but went to an Orthodox Jewish school, learned how to speak Hebrew at a young age, and sort of rebelled against it, and always had a fascination with religion. And now I reject the practice of Judaism for myself, but it's an interesting relationship to identity and background. So she talks about institutionalism and how people break down into the status quo versus brokenness, right? Status quo are the people working for the institutions that embrace them. The brokenness say they're hopelessly broken and that you're doing damage by supporting them. So you have a schism in society. And she's saying that decentralized parallel media, sort of the alt media, decentralized media, that all this can be a solution. Well, this is a big question about schisms in society. And I think, Alana, if we're being honest here, the reason we have this network state movement, which had its roots in sovereign state movements and wanting new things, right? This is not the first time this has happened in society. There are genuine differences between groups of people's mindsets. And some people want to exit, and some people don't. And there's not always a way to heal that schism other than to build different cultures and just say we can agree to disagree. And people build their own houses together. People build their own communities together. That's why different religions exist. It's not trivial, right? There are meaningful differences, and just to say everything's the same and that it'll all be healed up, it's not necessarily true in the long run. History has departure points, and I think Balaji would agree with me on that. Yassine from Nas Daily, Yassine's his last name. I mean, I really loved his speech. He comes off with his growth marketing mindset and sort of braggadocio about how well he's done with a lot of his previous blogs and companies. But he's really getting at something so fundamental, which is that it's both about the creator and the community, and the sort of destruction, the inevitable race to the bottom of modern social media and all these platforms is that the owners of these platforms, as the gatekeepers, just keep on essentially pushing artificial scarcity so they can extract more and more. So the creators get screwed, the community gets screwed. You're not guaranteeing that the incentives runs towards them, and on top of that, you're just going to start screwing with them. So with the right platforms, the creator and the community are connected, and the real bonds that create those special connections are what creates your new and special thing. And the key is giving control. His really unique observation is that what we're talking about is network states, right? Which is just people coming together in the digital sense. When we're talking about it in the cloud and in the digital sense, he's saying he doesn't really know how that'll happen. He believes that it will emerge from many sort of online communities where the creator and the community are really, really close. And he talks about Discord a lot, which is in Discord you see that. And so his idea of a network state or whatever is like really sticky to this concept is that it will emerge as from all of these communities. There'll be like one of them that's so powerful and so successful, or maybe the emergent state will gobble up the others, or not gobble up, but work with them and create some sort of amalgam of connectivity. Um, I like delving into that because there's sort of a landscape concept of online activity turning into something more like a state change, a phase change. Peter Romero comes next from Farcaster, which is a decentralized social media app. It looks cool. I'd love to join it. It's just his message was very narrow about the app. Crispin Frank from Synthesis came after. Now we're heading into the education stage of the talks, and this to me is a favorite subject. I think it's he's talking about tutoring and education with Benjamin Bloom, and how sort of he created an elite school for Elon Musk and a lot of the other SpaceX families. Probably this school is in, I would assume, Austin. But then he also ventures towards another discussion of sort of this digital Aristotle, right? The old idea that the best way to learn is through a tutor in a customized fashion. And so AI now can be the new digital Aristotle and really help accelerate learning, at least in autodidactic learning, which is a component of schooling, right? You can have social schooling, but time for teaching yourself, or as you do your homework and using methods of customized teaching using AI would be great. And he mentions the Less Wrong DARPA tutor and how he's had wild success, which I think is great. Michael Gibson is next from the 1617 Fund, and he makes a very brief appearance just to say that it's cool to have like an anti-institutional type of funding for a lot of new projects, like anti-Harvard Fund, anti-Rhodes Scholar Fund, and they're interested. Tyler Cowen, professor of economics, conversations with Tyler. He has this emergent ventures platform where they're funding a lot of new ventures, and his focus is on also debureaucratizing philanthropy. So there's a lot of giving, and I guess it's hard to get towards the good projects. They've also started with Alex Tabcock, the Marginal Revolution University, which I think is mostly free university. Education's huge, really important. Next guy, Amjad Masad, the founder of Replit, which is basically, I guess, a site which takes ideas into applications online, and it's a programming site. I've seen it sometimes. I've been recommended it a couple times, and there's a lot there, and I'd like to learn a lot more, to be honest. It seems like a one-off app, and I'm sure it has tremendous value to people in the networks who are associated and affiliated with Network State Ideas. Gary Tan comes on next, and he's the head of Y Combinator right now in San Francisco, and he's really pumping San Francisco. And he's talking about, if this works, if the network state works, there's institutional replacement. It's going to start at the internet-based level. It's going to start in the cloud. So he's as much as he loves and emphasizes being in San Francisco around smart people, that's his thing. He really does realize that this is going to be a cloud-based before it becomes more physically based. Then the next guy, oddly named, I don't know if it's his real name, Bef Bezos, seems like a play on Jeff Bezos, talks about effective accelerationism, which sounds a lot like effective altruism, which really is just another sort of jargon terminology for materialism. He goes on to sort of flash a bunch of jargon like cybernetics, and essentially Mr. Bef Bezos is seemingly a market fundamentalist, and he's just sort of worshiping at the altar of progress and materialism. And this is something I look down upon, in a sense. There's some good parts of what he's talking about, and he definitely mentions a very important thing in the paradigm of, and I wouldn't call it progress, but he puts it in progress. Progress is a dangerous word because technology worship and techno-utopianism is a very dangerous thing, and I think very, very subversive, and it's just quicksand for the culture of a network state. He does mention the network state cloud, right, and running essentially cloud tech and processing for network state applications. If you can't do that in different places and also on your own servers, which have to be decentralized, you're always going to be vulnerable to political attack or commercial attack. And it's very important to have autonomy, to have true autonomy. You have to control some of your core technology, and that would be your servers, right? And he doesn't really go into the details of servers, but he alludes to it. It's very important. So I'm glad he did that. Spencer McDonald of Spearbit Cantina comes in, and he was one of my favorite speakers of the whole day. In fact, the speakers of the second half were super impressive, and just very well-rounded and holistic. He's an Army officer, and he for an Army officer, because of that background, he has tremendous perspective. He talks about the importance of private messaging, and as just very important to security. And he's talking about security a lot, right? And in that sense, if you're going to talk about security beyond just cybersecurity in the cloud and communication, which is private messaging, and these are vital, right? How do you transition to any territory or even land? Now, people talk about having major cities, but what about little community centers? Like, if network states are going to really think about social benefits and stuff, well, having security, some of it would mean having an emergency doctor. No one thinks about that, but he's really talking about, his focus is public safety, right? His focus would be on who's going to be your security guard, right? And to get there you have to have meaningful talks about private security. He admits that any set of network state neighborhoods or otherwise are going to be piggybacking off of local jurisdictions, as they should. Who needs their own army? But for public safety, you do have to account for your own public safety, especially if you're in sort of a network state area where there isn't a lot of presence of government, and you have to provide for yourself. The sort of futuristic idea of drones being your primary means of defense in some new network state city, there's a lot there, but he very, I think, wisely alludes to this idea of security coming from human-machine teaming, and not just security but logistics. A lot of people think about AI or what we can do to automate or what we can do purely through cryptography or outsourcing and paying for services. But a lot of basic services of common security have to go through sort of this process of how do you get human beings and software to work better together to get things done much, much cheaper. And there's an element of just better organization and lean, fluid non-organizations that can get things done, sort of swarms of people that can get a bunch of skills done, including basic security work maybe. And that can be organized deeply with the help of machine learning and project software management, a lot of other things that network state people would be really good at managing. So sort of organizational labor and labor relations. So real life security is necessary, right? And he also talks about the fact that we need more statesmen in the network state movement. So I think that was an interesting statement, but I'd unpack that maybe in the future. Lewis from Aragon comes later. Aragon is a famous DAO management company that was early on with DAOs, a DAO platform, and now his focus is on sovereign individual for citizenship, and he's doing base flow, and it's important, he says, to have a sense of where you can buy citizenships, because those citizenships are very valuable. Yes, we know citizenships are very valuable, and shopping for citizenships is great. It's expensive. It's great. Mark Lutter from the Charter Citizens Institute. I mean, he's a giant, right? In this area, and PhD from George Mason, and he talks about the importance of governance. Obviously, that's a huge issue, and one of the big problems is corruption of governance through special interest group lobbying. This is now rife in the West, and has sort of parasitically taken down the host, right? All of the Western governments and probably all over the world, corruption is a major problem with special interests, and democracy allowed for this problem and cannot necessarily be used to undo it. So how do you change governance with better laws? He alludes to the Paul Romer talk, where there was this neo-colonial idea of having high-income countries sponsor lower, poor network states, and they would start new ones and have their own laws, and seasteading, and all of these failures. These were doomed pursuits, and his general observation, Mark Lutter says, is get smart people together wherever they are, wherever they can be. It's not going to be as ideal as Dubai or Shenzhen, growing with full, foot on the pedal from a major government making you successful. And he talks about NEOM. He doesn't get into the details, mentions Prospera, Praxis, Bravo cities. He sort of goes through the list pretty quickly. But you've got to focus, and he mentions this, and not enough people do, on the culture of the people. And the culture comes from where the population comes from, because the older your population, the more deep-seated their culture, because they're used to it. So if you have hundreds of thousands to millions of people, where are these people coming from? Now, a model where you're saying you're going to build some new city with just a lot of rich people, that's going to be hard to pull off. It's going to be very small. So if you get a lot of poor people from the global south, you can get a major migration and create a city. Or if you get a lot of rural people who tend to be poor to an urban place, this is also a way that major accumulations of people happen. So you're looking at cities with hundreds of thousands of people being built with at least tens of thousands of acres. And anything of this scale would necessarily need to be piggyback off an existing state. It would have to be an SEC of some sort or a negotiated state. And, he's got, you can sense the sort of profound wisdom he has in this area, and his patience too, which I really like, because it's so easy to get impatient with a lot of the impractical things people say about what can be done, especially with the ambitions to create something that big. You look at, there's a lot of projects out there which really strike me as bunk, and I like crapping on things sometimes. Tolosa, like the city of Tolosa, I'm sure if we had a fireside chat with Mark Lutter, he'd be like, yes, we agree. This is not practical, and this was almost not even conceived with anything in practicality in mind. And they sort of greenwashed it or redwashed it with ideas of Georgism and socialism, land socialism. Not that I'm entirely against some of the concepts, but these are not cure-alls. You cannot say land socialism is a cure-all for building a city. Cities are really hard to build. People are hard to get in a new place to do great things. Nicholas Enzinger, a good friend of mine, and he talks about the FDA being a big problem. And so now we're transitioning towards the real city state. We're transitioning towards prosperity. Someone who's already done it or tried it or is in the middle of it. And one of their great ambitions is to create sort of, the Prospera healthcare incubator that makes new great technologies and can do whatever it wants. And to begin with, now they have some biotourism there. That's great, but they want massive clinical trials to be held there. They want a lot of things which would be even sponsored by Pfizer and paid for by other major corporations that are in the innovation business with genetics and other products. And we can talk about that as well with the sort of burgeoning movement in America that is against forced gene therapies and as well as forced inoculations for kids in the wake of the COVID crisis. But he talks about the FDA being the problem, and our body is vital to being in a certain place is vital to getting some things done that the network state would be necessary for. So if you want special jurisdictions so that you can really engage in new therapies and stuff, you really need a physical space. So for him, Prospera is it. Lawrence Ion of Italia comes up next, and he talks about the same thing. And a lot of the focus here is a lot of the focus for a lot of the biotech stuff is on health span and longevity promoting drugs. There is a lot of focus on that. Brian Johnson, wonderful guy in the space. There's a lot. I want to say one quick thing here, because this is, I have a little bit of a background in biology, and this is something I really love. And I'm a big fan of the actions people are taking. They're really trying to make people healthier. They're really trying to find ways of improving an important part of all cultures, which is how, we deal with health and preserving health and minimizing sickness and sort of the lifespan, the life cycle. Not too many people in the network state talk about conception and birth and the raising of the child for the first year, which is the sort of fourth trimester in which this child, this human being, is in the becoming phase, and then everything's a phase, and so of course there's a later phase. So what I really disliked is that Lawrence Ion discussed dying as a disease or death as a disease, and it's hard for me to talk about this sometimes, but what I would say is that for people in this vein, and I've gone to a lot of longevity events over the years, and there's a lot of crossover now with sovereign state, with crypto. For people who want the actions, I love what everyone's doing, but the way you talk about things matters. Cody Sanchez, who's probably one of the best guests of the evening, also talks about this. The way you talk about things matters, especially when it's about important things. Death is important. People like to go into these long talks about why it's a disease. You may be objectively correct in your thinking. There are two worlds. There's objective worlds where we all project this idea of objective reality, and then there's what we accept as subjective reality. In this sense, we accept that everyone has a different way of thinking, a different culture. People all come from very different places in their head. There are some people, objectively speaking, that are dying right now, and there are some people, objectively speaking, that they are dealing with the death of another person right now, death and the suffering and sickness of other people. Now, when you say that the dying is a disease itself, if they're dying from old age, or let's say they got hit by a truck. Well, that's, I'm sure we could agree to disagree on these things. But death and the loss around death, the way we speak about that is about communing with other people who are experiencing suffering. And real community, one of the most vital ritualistic aspects and psychosocial aspects of real community is not just celebrating the good, but it's also common suffering, finding common meaning in suffering, not just empathizing with one another, but actually suffering together. In Judaism, you're supposed to visit people who are grieving other people, and there's a prescribed grieving process. Sitting shiva. It's very important to have common meaning in suffering. This is really one of the most important parts of religion, and of course, death as one of the fundamental aspects of suffering in life. The presence of death. It's really important to talk about it not as a disease, to show respect for other human beings. It will not detract. By declaring death as a disease, you're almost rhetorically trying to create more fear around the subject in order to pummel someone into believing, yes, we should do living forever and longevity and all this stuff. You don't even have to do that. You just tell people that all these technologies are great. They're going to make you much more healthy, and you don't have to even go into to speaking negatively about death. It's a complicated subject, and speaking negatively about it is sort of a refusal to engage in common suffering with people and making common meaning with people. That there's no need to refuse that, and in many cases it can be problematic for other people for them to hear these things. Big discussion to have there, but it's something you can tell I obviously care about a lot because I care about community a lot and what that really means in a deeper sense of how people are together. And that's not to say that I believe that I'm talking about supernatural realities or heaven and hell or divine punishment and good and evil and all of these things. Next, Patrick Joyce from Researcher Hub comes up. Patrick talks about the problems with science, right? Science has become itself incredibly corrupted, and it always was. This is a favorite subject of mine, and it's corrupted by very many different paths. Cherry picking in the sciences, which happened for pharmaceutical drugs, has been elevated towards conspiratorial levels of jabinization. I will not call them vaccines. They are not vaccines. A forcible injection of gene therapies at the end of a pink slip or other types of coercion are problematic. So that's corrupted the sciences. A lot of things have. We can tell that the climate sciences have been incredibly corrupted, and it's always about incentives and special interests. Whether or not A, B, or C is true, the presence of conflicts of interest is incredibly important. And his project, Research Coin, which is about decentralized science or decentralized publishing, and he doesn't really go into talk about decentralized peer review. Peer review is very complicated. It can't be. People try to anonymize it, but there are techniques and methods. Anyway, the publishing aspect of it, very interesting. Next, Anatoly Yakovenko of Solana comes up, and he basically discusses that, the real essence of the crypto and financial system is being decentralized, and that's sort of the bedrock and background of what's going on around, above and below the network state efforts. And scarcity of transactions is just like a real problem. Creating total abundance by having a super high throughput network with extremely low costs is essential to financial processing and having an open network. And I wanted to add something to this, which is not really just about financial information. It's about information and communication generally. Like, how do you create parallel systems that eliminate, by way of decentralized incentive schemes, that eliminate the gatekeeper problem, the artificial scarcity problem, the person who's throwing a wrench into the gears because he owns it and he wants to extract more, their pound of flesh from the system and de-optimize it, essentially. Winklevoss twins came on and basically gave a shout out to Balaji in 2 minutes, which is cool. The Winklevoss twins are fun. Cody Sanchez then comes on, and she's just lovely. She's a really lovely speaker. Very personable, and she really talks about something that's really important, and that's like really missing from this entire network state debate, and probably from the audience, which is, in this search for parallel institutions and building these parallel methodologies to get around a lot of the problems that we're dealing with. You cannot eliminate the basic need for maintenance workers, blue-collar workers, whatever you want to call them. There's a class of people who are not going to be tremendous innovators. They're going to have lots of wisdom. They can fix things. They can maintain things. These are the dirty fingers and calloused hands, she likes to call it. And you need people to do everything. Like we are so stuck in this so-called discussion of community. What you need people to get things done. So either you're talking about having like little network state clutches of people who are highly specialized and only do one little thing. But if it's a big city, you need a critical mass and critical mix of people. I would even say, insofar as the network state is a lot of little decentralized patches right now, not yet ready to commit and totally resource to a big city. Not that it's either or, they could support it, almost like a Zion or something, or some sort of arc. We'll talk about that later in a minute. But you need a critical mix of people. And I would say in every location, it's not even about demanding it. It's about finding what is the mix of people and understanding your bouquet of people. She also hints at this sort of IQism and this jargon masquerading as IQism for people, sort of IQism being, we're smarter and we're better. This is a sort of hubristic attitude you find in many groups, especially in the Ivy League, especially amongst people who don't deserve it, but even amongst people who are smarter or whatever. It's very foolish to be hubristic because successful human communities need people of all sorts of skills, and it's really important to bring those people in. They don't need to be with you; they can go somewhere else. People who are skilled are needed, and it's very important to understand that you need them, right? And that this isn't just a trade. You need them in a personal sense. This has to be part of a real bigger community idea, communing with people. So it's one thing to have the big ideas. You got to bring along the workers, as she says. So now comes the last two people. And I would say that Balaji did a great service. The sort of headline, in my opinion, is Kathleen Tyson, and then he has a sort of tire-upper as Peter St. Onge. Two amazing talks, really amazing talks. I would say the Kathleen Tyson talk is so important that it should be posted. I recorded it on a screen, and I thought I'd repost it, but I don't want to do that for fear of being intrusive. You should watch it. It's at the end of the second day. Kathleen Tyson of Pacemaker Global. The sort of buzzword multi-currency mercantilism is what she talks about. But basically her spiel is simply this. The rest of the world does not want to be a slave to the dollar system anymore. And short of world war, which is a very real possibility, or other sort of ongoings, the sanctions that America applied to Russia are part of the last gasps and tricks of a Goliath maintaining and protecting their currency turf, right? This is a colossus. Not that they're going to fall quite right away, but the others are catching up. The Occidental growth is exploding in India and elsewhere, and technology and the scaling of technology really benefits the leapfrogging process in the East. There's going to be tremendous growth in the East, and she sort of alludes to the fact that the middle classes in the West, their time's up. Our time is up. The time of 70 years to rapidly accumulate wealth, if you don't already have it, we are going to become haves and have-nots more. But at the same time, there's going to be a lot of growth in the East. So this is a really bright picture, as well as the fact that raising people out of total poverty to base levels is quite a progress for humanity. It's a really good thing for human beings. She talks about China being a great place, and I would agree with her, but she also she doesn't want to emphasize in her sort of global view that there are genuine differences between cultures. So she talks about the monetary system. Her background is tremendous. Her resume is more impressive than probably like all 20 people combined in its talks. It's impressive. Seriously, watch it. Peter St. Onge then comes up afterward. I guess he's from Heritage Foundation, and he gives this like really great talk, like you would get from like Michael Robbo writing from Rabobank, Michael Every on Rabobank. He's a great writer on Zero Hedge. Peter St. Onge just describes the state of affairs that we're currently living in. He describes this sort of apocalyptic financial worldview that Balaji seems to embrace a little bit. The dollar milkshake model. As the dollar's throwing off chaos, originating from America but making a mess everywhere, And that's happening, and we're going to see inflation and high rates for a long time, which is going to be seriously painful. It's a repeat of the 70s, but nothing repeats, it rhymes. And he tries to end on a good note, although not entirely convincing, that good things are happening in India and elsewhere. So financial apocalypse isn't the end of the world. And Balaji then really wanted everybody to give their feedback, and I'm sure he did. I wanted to know the results. I wanted to give the feedback, but I wasn't at the conference, and I tried to go on the QR code thing. Didn't work, but I'd love a copy of that Eric Jorgensen book. It would be cool. So I'm gonna just address a few themes from the talk that and themes that I consider a lot. A lot of the assumptions that people speak they assume while speaking about network state is that the swarm and the crowd is always the best thing, that it provides the best results. Now, what transitioned from the recent past of 5 to 10 years ago was that reputation systems, other systems for extracting the wisdom of the crowd were limited, let's say, because of centralized platforms. And so the assumption of the network state is that decentralization of the crowd and the swarm's incentives and the way that they can be rewarded and the way that their reputations can be recorded and verified and commented upon, that because of this verification and all this way of changing incentives about things, that all of a sudden the swarm and the crowd are better than ever and they can accomplish everything, as if the problems of coordinating really large groups of people who are not necessarily experts and then them learning and competing, sometimes collaborating to get things done will produce the end result that you want. That's perfect. Well, there are problems with the swarms and crowds that really go beyond or exist outside of the context of whatever their incentives are. Just sort of what they're doing might not necessarily be as good as one really focused person that you pay, right? Like a journalist that you pay just straight up from a centralized institution because things are simple. It's a point to be thought about. This is another thing that's really important. People take into this assumption that, there are these physical space network state startups, and then there's this idea that there's going to be one Zion or Omega City or some triad of like New York, London, Vatican, cities to define the network state. So realistically, there's like little patches of things sort of organically happening or not so organically funded, and they're small, and people have bigger visions, and I don't see why they can't be combined, that there's some sort of nexus of connections between lots of small places with a common goal of bringing forth at least one bigger place that they all contribute to. And I think that's Zuzulu, and I call that the Ark of the Covenant, right? The Ark of the Covenant in Judaism was what nomadic Jews had and brought with them. It was the repository of God, right? I'm speaking about that in maybe two facetious or blasphemous tones, but having something you bring with you that's sacred until you settle down and create your nation state is really important. And I think Zuzulu is that arc. It's traveling now. I think that that's the spirit of the people, and I think that that's got to have people have to be more open to the idea of how does that connect to like a broader, more decentralized or diffuse groups of people, not of all of whom agree on the same things. There's a lot of different politics, and that's another thing I want to get into. There's a lot of different assumptions about the backgrounds and politics of people in this space, and I think when Mark Lauder talks about people are where they're from, right? So, and that's really important. He's talking about it in large scale numbers, but in small scale numbers, when we're talking about common culture, there's people on the left, people on the right. That's one way of dicing people up, and sometimes it's very effective, but there's also like, what's your real background? And so Balaji, oddly enough, and it's funny to me, likes to talk about he in his early network state podcasts or book or whatever, talked about the Jewish state by Herzl, and he talks about Judaism and the transition to Israel as paradigmatic, as an interesting example for the network state. And I would say this about that, because Balaji, I think wisely so. I've been a very big critic on his Twitter. Maybe sometimes I've been a jerk, and Balaji, forgive me if I've written brashly, but religion is a very serious topic. It's an important one. It's probably good that someone like Balaji, who's bringing forth this movement, is avoiding it, because it can be off-putting. It's a four-letter word. You could just say practical philosophy, or philosophy as practiced in a social sense. Religion is certainly not the mystical individual practice of philosophy, but it is the communal and group and social practice of philosophy. So that's important. It's something that shouldn't just be ignored, and at some point addressed more deeply. And then another thing I wanted to get to finally is health. So having corporations and other entities focus on complicated innovation in the health environment is important. But health is also something that brings people together, not just having a nomadic travel insurance program and knowing who the doctors are in different places. Because when you go live somewhere, you find out very quickly it's important to know a good doctor, right? People say, oh, have a good doctor, have a good lawyer. No, have a good doctor. Forget the lawyer. Take it from me, I'm a lawyer. So have a good doctor and have people who know who are the good doctors, and having these kind of networks. But then what else? Health is very important, whether you're a mother, whether you're pregnant, whether you are an old person. These talks, where are the old people? Where are the people that are older than 70 that maybe have some health problems? You don't really see them. That's because it's, network state, it's aspirational. We're looking towards the future, towards building new things. So it's mostly younger people. And not to say younger people don't have health problems, but it's important to think about growing old and dying somewhere, or growing old and just having problems traveling and visiting a new place. Maybe old people with a ton of money or whatever would want to visit and get longevity treatments. They need healthcare somewhere, or if they're visiting some other network state place, they need to worry about those things. So that's important. And then finally, in the cloud sense, something that I've tried. It's fun. There's these. The cycling, the bicycle that's in the cloud. Oh my God, I can't believe my memory is failing me. But you're on a bike and you're biking against other people that are far away. And so, community, the idea of having community centers in network state places, whether it's in New York with the new community stuff going on in New York, having people exercise together is very, physically, the proximity of doing things together. If they can't do it physically together, even being on these cloud technologies where you can see someone exercising or doing something like that, where you can commune with them in a basic physical sense, because physical stimulation is healthy. And yet, do we really need that? I go for long walks on my own all the time in New York City. A lot of times I don't even take my phone with me. The last thing I really want is more of that. But when it comes to community centers and having people do things together, activities together, in a health sense, it's not just about dis-ease and pathology and having healthcare practitioners. It's about maintaining, and that is about eating well together, and eating is a very important spiritual activity. The food and how we get it. What are the rules of how we eat together? Guidelines of how we eat together, and thinking about eating. Food is a very important thing to the spirit, when you talk about the corruption of the state, the corruption of the food systems, we're not just talking about high inflation now. We're looking at a world where every day we're battered with messaging about how global food insecurity is imminent, and billion people might starve, and we're being softened up, and we're being exposed to these repeated messages as a part of predictive programming, so that we should come to expect it. It should be okay that people are starving to death, and that we watch it, and that we fear for ourselves that our food's getting expensive. In New York City, I mean, you go out and you get a burger, it's like $30 at least to get a burger in a diner. So stuff's getting more expensive, but boo-hoo, that's for going out and eating. What about going and buying your groceries? What about how do people prepare food? So the making of food and exercising, and I say both because eating is very communal, and that's been alluded to in this talk, and so is moving together. I think those are very important. Whether it's yoga or something else, it's a key thing in terms of proximity, and you don't have to have everybody in one giant city to do it. People can be doing it everywhere in different places, and they do. Okay, that was a lot. That's an hour and 13 minutes, but that's about 7 hours of watching content, and it was it was rich content. There was a lot being said, and Balaji was just moving everybody again and again, and I was like pretty impressed. One of the better lineups I've heard. So I just wanted to say thank you for everybody at the conference. Thank you, Balaji, and just really grateful. It was like really that I could. There's that much signal and almost no noise.
I mean, that's something. That really is something. So thank you.